Hi guys, I'm Courtney,
And I'm Lisa.
and welcome to the next chapter in the Book of the Dead, brought to you by Darkcast Network, indie podcasts with a twist. Hello. Welcome to the next chapter. Lisa's back. She feels better.
Yes, I do. It's just allergies. Anyone that suffers with allergies know. Oh, it's terrible.
So before we begin, I just wanted to let you guys know that we are having a Black Friday sale on our merch store. You can save 20% off of your total order using code BlackFriday20. So head on over to our website, botdpod.com, and check out our merch. We have some cool stuff up there. Maybe I'm a little biased, maybe not, but I like our merch. I think it's cool. Anyway, we're going to jump right in. The story I have for you today is an interesting one. One that really shows what a person can do when they're backed into a corner, or when they feel like they are backed into a corner. So this is the murder of Kenneth Nix. Kenneth Nix, who went by Ken, was born in Lake Charles, Louisiana. He was the oldest of 6 children, and he loved cars and motorcycles. His son Kevin said, quote, "My dad was a very good mechanic. He was the youngest Texaco gas station owner in Lake Charles." According to all sources, Ken was, while a very good businessman, he was not very successful when it came to love. He met and married his first wife in 1966, and they had 3 children together. During that time, they moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma, but ultimately, Ken and his wife got a divorce, and over the next 10 years, Ken would marry 3 more times. While his relationships continued to struggle, Ken started a diving business in 1980 called Inland Divers Inc., which offered scuba diving and underwater salvage, and it was going fabulously. He was a really, really great businessman. 4 years after starting Inland Divers, Ken meets Judith Bailey. Judith was also divorced. She had been married in the late 1960s, but following the birth of her daughters, Angela and Michelle, Judith and her husband divorced. She was originally from Texas, but had moved to Tulsa, and she worked as an accountant. After meeting, Judith and Kenneth hit it off, and in 1985, they married in Las Vegas and moved into a house in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. Soon after, Judith started working as the bookkeeper for Inland Divers. Now, they were married for 30 years, and for a while, things were seemingly great, and they lived and worked happily together. But by the 2000s, things started falling apart. According to Oxygen, Kevin said, quote, "My father raised me and my brother to be on our own and not be dependent on anybody. But Judy coddled her kids, financed her kids anytime they had a problem, and that caused turmoil between my father and Judy. Communication between the two was diminishing." Now, I will say there's absolutely nothing wrong with the way the both of them decided to raise their children. There's nothing wrong with Judy coddling her daughters or financially supporting them. And there's nothing wrong with Ken teaching his kids to be independent. But I think the main issue was they both had these wildly different parenting styles. And that's where part of the problem was. I can see from Ken's point of view why Judy supporting her daughters was a problem for him, because her daughters were adults by this point, and I'm sure he thought they needed to do things on their own without their mother's help. But I can also see why Judy disagreed with Ken's parenting style as well. I'm sure she was thinking along the lines of, if a child needs help regardless of age, then the parent should supply that help if they have the means to. I can see both sides, and I can also see why this was putting a wedge between them. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. As you said, it's 2 almost polar opposites in how they're going to raise their children.
According to Medium.com, in January of 2011, Ken filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, but he allegedly rescinded 2 weeks later. A few months later, in August, Judy filed for divorce for the same reason, but she also filed for an order of protection against Ken, saying that she was fearful of her life and that Ken was violent and had been abusing her for the last 2 years. However, this order of protection case was allegedly dismissed when both Ken and Judith failed to show up for the hearing. The divorce itself was finalized in September of 2011, but in the short period between the filing and the divorce being granted, the police allegedly responded to 3 different calls to the home in Broken Arrow. However, the calls came from both Judith and Ken. So Judith said that Ken was violent, but Ken was also allegedly saying that she was violent with him as well. After the divorce, Judith moved out, but it seems as if they had reconciled to some extent because, according to all reports, Judith started spending a lot of time with Ken in Broken Arrow. Now, I don't know if they were considering back together. That's allegedly what her lawyer was saying, that he had heard that they had gotten back together. But at the very least, they were very friendly, and Judith even still had a key to her former home. It seems as if their relationship was healing, and over the next couple of years, there's no reports of anything going on that raised any red flags. That is until March 21st, 2016. At around 9 p.m. on March 21st, Broken Arrow police get a desperate call for help from Judith Nix. During this call, Judith said she had stopped by Ken's home to drop off dinner for him, and she had found him dead of an apparent gunshot wound. He was 69 years old. Judith told the dispatcher, according to News on 6, quote, "It looks like someone shot him. There's a gun lying right by his left hand." And when asked by dispatch if Kenneth had been displaying thoughts of suicide, she said, quote, "Yes, he's very despondent. He's got so many health issues. Neuropathy is getting so painful he just can't deal with it anymore. He is so active he can't hardly deal with this." And according to disabilitymemorial.org, Kenneth was suffering from chronic nerve disease or peripheral neuropathy. As a little background, according to the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke, peripheral neuropathy, quote, refers to the many conditions that involve damage to the peripheral nervous system, which is a vast communications network that sends signals between the central nervous system and all other parts of the body. So these signals control everything we do, from moving, feeling temperature, the function of our organs, everything your body does, your nervous system is telling it what to do. There are 3 types of nerves: motor, which controls the movement of all muscles under conscious control; sensory, which are the nerves that transmit information like the feeling of touch, temperature, or pain; and autonomic, which controls your organs to regulate the things you do without conscious thought, like breathing or heart function. So symptoms vary depending on the severity, but they usually aren't life-threatening and can include painful cramps, uncontrollable twitching and muscle shrinking, heat intolerance, loss of feeling and reflexes, gastrointestinal symptoms, problems swallowing. I mean, the list goes on. It really depends on what is being affected and the severity of the neuropathy. But the main point of this is that his neuropathy could have been severe enough that it drove him to suicide based on what Judith was saying.
Okay, well, if you're in constant pain, no, it is not condoning anything, but constant pain can honestly make you so frustrated. So, when you're in constant pain, it's kind of, you're in desperate people do desperate things just to have some relief.
Yeah, so it's very possible, based on what Judith is saying, that the pain he was in was so bad and he was so active, or had been so active, that, it drove him to suicide. At least that's what Judith is saying happened.
Right. This is a definite, this is exactly what happened kind of scenario, but you do understand as you said, the desperation in not feeling well.
The officers arrive and Judith leads them to the master bedroom where they find Kenneth in bed, a gunshot wound to his left temple, and a pistol right next to him. According to Oxygen.com, when Judith was asked when she had last seen Ken, she said, quote, "The last time I was here was the night before, between 4 to 5 p.m., and I left because he got kind of grumpy and tired." She then told police that she had called before coming by with dinner, but he never answered her call. Pretty much as soon as the investigation begins, though, police were skeptical that Ken's cause of death was really suicide. For one, the blood around the entrance wound was dry and there was lividity present. Now, the lividity being present was probably one of the bigger clues, because lividity, or livor mortis, according to exploreforensics.co.uk, is, quote, the process through which the body's blood supply will stop moving after the heart has stopped pumping it around the inside of the deceased. What normally happens at this point is that the blood supply will settle in direct response to gravity. This displays itself as dark purple discoloration on the body, so a body lying face down for an extended period of time will show this discoloration on the front of the body, and someone lying on their back would have evidence of lividity on the back of the body. Lividity, according to this, begins within 30 minutes of the heart stopping and can last up to 12 hours. Lividity can only be disrupted during the first 6 hours if the body is moved. The presence of lividity in Ken's case indicated to police that Ken had been dead for hours. This doesn't rule out suicide, but this made the police suspicious. The other indication that this was not suicide came when Ken's body was moved. There was the original gunshot wound that police observed upon arrival, but they also saw about 1 inch over a second bullet wound. You can't shoot yourself in the head twice.
I would not think so. Please don't tell me that they call this suicide. Because the police have done, or in other cases that we've covered, they've done just that. Where someone has been, murdered where they're stabbed or they're shot, and the police rule it a suicide, and I think everybody was shaking their head going, like, how does that happen? Gee, let me think about one we covered not too long ago, where they said this young man killed himself except his hands were in his pockets and there was no shell casing.
We're still mad about Alex Mendelssohn.
Because it doesn't make sense. It's impossible. I asked my expert, who was in the military for 25 years, knows pretty much every single weapon inside and out, can take them apart and put them together in under a minute, depending on the weapon it is. He said, as I was asking the question, which I already knew the answer to, but I just wanted confirmation, said, that is impossible. Yes, we're a little salty. So, you can't. It's impossible. Yes. If someone can explain this to me, please do so. But you cannot shoot yourself twice.
No, you can't. So, police are suspicious.
Good.
But the other thing that really solidified their suspicion was there were bloodstains on his shirt that didn't match up with the injuries, nor did they match up to the position he was found in, indicating that he had been moved. And finally, the medical examiner determined that Ken's time of death was 7:30 a.m. the day before he was found, almost 14 hours before Judith claimed to have found him. So police knew this was a homicide, besides the fact that, according to Judith, she had seen Ken at around 4 or 5 p.m. the day before, but he was already dead, according to the medical examiner.
So I'm calling shenanigans on her story. And the police are calling shenanigans on her story.
Exactly. So it's not really clear how police get to Michelle, Judith's daughter. Not sure how or what led them to her. But they go speak to her. And they ask her about the relationship between her mom and Ken. And Michelle says that the relationship was not good. Ken was abusive. And she and her sister Angela didn't get along with him either. Now, when asked where she was the day that Ken died, according to Oxygen, Michelle says she had gone to Ken's house at around 11 a.m. and met her mother there, who gave her some money, but she never entered the house. Now, this is also what Judith told police, but they weren't buying the story, so Michelle is actually arrested under suspicion of being an accessory to murder, according to Coco News 5. After Michelle's arrest, police get a call from a man named Todd Moore, who was the estranged husband of Angela, Michelle's sister. And he had a very interesting story to share with the police. According to prosecutor Benjamin Fu, Todd said that Michelle and Angela had come to Todd and told him that Judith had shot Ken and tried to get him to help them cover up the crime, which he refused. So the police talked to Judith again, who, according to News 2 Oklahoma, may have been in the hospital at this point. I'm assuming given that she was also 69, that paramedics took her to the hospital to treat her for possible shock after she had called 911. She had a medical condition or something, and she went to the hospital. So they go to the hospital and speak to her. And this whole investigation, as a side note, happened very quickly because she was at the hospital almost immediately after police questioned her after she found Ken's body and speaking to Michelle. This whole investigation took like a day. Like, Ken was found on a Sunday, and by Monday, all arrests had been made. Like, this was like 24 hours or less.
I'm thinking part of the reason is that the story didn't line up with, I mean, I can't imagine the autopsy just being that quick. Normally it takes more time.
No, of course. And I mean, the medical examiner could have tested or determined time of death at the scene. I mean, that has to do with, there are different variables that help determine time of death. You have the lividity, you have rigor mortis, you have body temperature. I mean, there are plenty of things to help determine that. So he could have done that at the scene.
Oh, absolutely. I wasn't saying that, but normally a full autopsy takes more than 24 hours. However, they knew approximate time of death, which did not line up with the story that his estranged ex-wife, was telling. So the clues were there. You know, it was just kind of connecting the dots.
Exactly.
For the police.
Exactly. So this was, again, as a side note, a very quick investigation. So they go to the hospital and they ask her what happened. And they inform her, look, we have arrested Michelle because we think that she may not have killed Ken, but we think that she helped someone do it. So Judith, we already know, would do pretty much anything for her daughters, given that she supports them financially, and it's already been established she'd do anything for them. So she hears that Michelle has been arrested, and she starts talking. So she tells police that Ken was very lonely due to his medical issues, but impossible to live with, and that Ken said that she owed him money that he had allegedly given to her daughters. She said, quote, he's threatened me all the time, he's hit me, verbally abusive, absolutely just out of this world. You know, it's easy to say you can just leave, but I love the guy. She tells police that on the day of the murder, Ken had told her that she owed him over $20,000, and when she said she didn't have it, he pulled the gun on her and said he would kill her if she didn't pay. Judith said that they had struggled with the gun and it went off twice. Then she called her daughters and asked them to help her because she panicked, which is a very good story. And I am not one to diminish domestic violence or anything like that. I am not saying that Ken was or was not a violent person. I don't know that. However, according to Judith herself, Ken had severe neuropathy. That implies that the man could not move very well. Again, I don't know his full medical history. I have no idea how severe his symptoms was, but the implication is that a very active man was very despondent because his neuropathy was so severe. That implies, again, that he could not move very well. He most likely had numbness to his extremities and a lot of pain. You can't move very well under those conditions. 1. 2, there was zero sign of a struggle in the bedroom. None whatsoever. So the implication then is, how does a man with severe neuropathy, clearly lying in bed, struggle with an able-bodied woman with no sign of a struggle? Like, how does that happen?
Your guess is as good as mine. It doesn't make sense to me, and obviously it does not make sense to you. But what did she have to say about this? So, like, this is where I'm going. I want to hear the story.
Well, police don't think it's a very convincing story either, because they arrest her at the hospital and charge her with first-degree murder, and they actually track down Angela and arrest her as an accessory as well, according to KTUL. Now, according to Tulsa World, when questioned again, Michelle told police that she and Angela had discussed the murder with their mother, and she had contemplated staging a robbery, a suicide, or just running away. And when he heard about Judith's arrest, her divorce lawyer, Gregory Meyer, was shocked. He said, quote, "From what I recall about the relationship, I would have thought it was the other way around. The Judith I knew was not a murderer." So at least according to Meyer, he's saying if someone was going to be murdered out of the two of them, it would have been Judith. But he's also her lawyer, not Ken's lawyer.
Right.
So
how does he really know him?
Exactly. He's hearing things from Judith about their relationship. He's not hearing them from Ken. But again, I'm not saying he was or was not a violent man. For all I know, he was. He could have been, but I don't know that. He could have been a great guy. You know, according to his son, he was a great guy. But Judith is not as innocent as she seems. Police continue investigating after the arrests and discovered text messages that Judith had exchanged with her daughters. According to Oxygen, she spoke about how much she hated Ken in these text messages. And days before the murder, she had also discussed a gun that was similar in description to the gun found at the scene with her daughter. Kevin also told police that Judith would steal money and prescription drugs from his father, and when he would confront her about it, she would tell Ken he was crazy. Police also discovered that Judith was in an insane amount of debt and believed that this was the motive for the murder. They believe that Ken found out about the debt and possibly said she had to pay him back or he was done with her and she lost it. According to their divorce agreement, if Ken died, Judith would get the house in Broken Arrow. So they believed he was killed so that she could sell the house and settle some of her debt after she acquired the house. Which is very possible. Again, it's very possible she felt backed into a corner. You know, if Ken found out about the debt that she was in and confronted her about it, it's very possible that she freaked out.
Well, how many times do you hear that someone is murdered because, you know, money? It's a money thing.
It's a very common motive that people have for murder. It is out of desperation.
As I said, desperate. I am not condoning murder in any way, shape, or form, but they say desperate times call for desperate measures, and you don't know how desperate she was. You have to be desperate. How could you possibly, murder somebody? So, is it possible that she felt backed into a corner? Yes. Is it an excuse? No, there's never an excuse for this. But you hear it all the time. Someone's murdered for their life insurance. Someone's murdered for an inheritance or they weren't going to share the inheritance. So people do these crazy, crazy, evil things when they think that they are, or they feel that they are backed into a corner.
Now, according to Tulsa World, when they go to trial, Judith's defense tries very hard to argue that Judith was suffering from battered wife syndrome, which led to Ken's murder. They described him as, quote, a serial physical and emotional abuser who isolated Judith from her family and initiated an altercation that resulted in his death. Now, I will say, there is no evidence of that anywhere. No one in any of the sources I read said anything about that level of abuse. Again, no one knows the relationship that intimately except for the two of them, and Judith is the only one around to tell the story, but there's no evidence of that. As far as I know, there were no domestic violence calls prior to the divorce being filed, so maybe they didn't have a great relationship where they yelled and screamed at each other a lot, but from what I'm gathering, it doesn't seem like Ken was abusive and their relationship was that toxic. to that level where there was isolation and physical abuse and things like that. But again, there could have been, but it seems like if there was, it was on both parts, at least according to what Kevin said.
What I don't understand is, she raised her children, and she always helped them and whatnot. Where did she get the money to, I'll say, support them in their times of need if he wasn't aware of it?
For all I mean, she was the bookkeeper for his company. For all I know, she was using the money from the company. And that's where the $20,000 she owed him came from. If she really owed him $20,000. Again, that's what Judith is saying.
Right. Well, this is the question that I have. How do you, I guess she could have embezzled the money, but if she's saying that he kept her from her family, well, he didn't keep her from her daughters.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what other family there was.
Yeah, and again, she was originally from Texas and they had moved to Oklahoma. So, I mean, she wasn't seeing her family that often physically. I mean, it could have been in the case of Lynette Quast, where he wouldn't allow her to talk on the phone to her family. But I don't know if that was the case. But either way, I mean, she was getting the money to support her daughters from somewhere. And the logical assumption was that she was getting it straight from Ken. So if their relationship was that volatile, I don't see him giving her that money if he really was this terrible person that he said he was.
That's what I'm getting at. I'm agreeing with you 100%. The pieces don't fit together.
No, I agree.
That's, there's a disconnect there someplace. Mm-hmm. Now, again, you weren't there, we weren't there, nobody else was there. You weren't a fly on the wall watching their lives go by. But you can't say that he's, keeping her from her family when obviously her daughters are in her life and she's helping to support them in their times of need. She got the money somehow, somewhere. Is she just saving her quote-unquote salary so that in case her children need that, she's got it for them?
Exactly. It's the story doesn't quite make sense, especially when you're looking at it that way. Now, in response to this defense strategy, the battered wife syndrome, prosecutor Benjamin Foos said that this claim made a mockery of battered women, and although the jury may not like Ken based on what was being said by the defense, quote, evidence showed that his ex-wife meant for him to die when she shot him to end arguments about finances. He said, quote, how is he an aggressor as he's sitting with a gunshot wound to the face, literally never leaving the perimeter of his bed? Angela and Michelle also testified against their mother about her discussing killing Ken with them and were adamant that Ken was abusive and that Judith was defending herself against him. But they were also never charged with being an accessory, most likely as a result of testifying. So it was probably like to save face with their mother. You know what I mean? Like, we're not getting charged for this. You are, but like, because we're testifying you, but we're gonna say things in your defense to try and get you off too. You know what I mean?
Oh, I do. I mean, that's their mom. That's the person that, again, helped them out when they needed help. And if she's not around because she goes to prison, well, that financial help is no longer there.
So the defense failed to prove there was any evidence of a struggle, and the prosecution did their best to prove that the scene was staged, showing messages that Judith had sent her daughters that I mentioned before, and showing that by placing the gun next to Ken in bed and then leaving to buy fried chicken and sending a message about bringing Ken dinner, she was further setting up the scene to look like a suicide. The defense brings in a mental health expert, Kyle Groman, who testified that he believed Judith had battered woman syndrome, major depressive disorder, and another personality disorder with mixed avoidant and dependent traits. But upon cross-examination, Groman admitted that battered woman syndrome is not listed in the Manual of Mental Disorders used by the medical community and that it's a subset of PTSD. Ultimately, after 2 hours of deliberation, in March of 2017, Judith is found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 38 years. That would make her 108 by the time she is up for parole. At sentencing, prosecutor Benjamin Fu said, quote, "What's unusual about this case and that people don't expect is that the victim in this case was a male. He was larger than his wife. He was a robust man. But victims of domestic violence come in all shapes and sizes. They come from all walks of life, and the point we hope every family takes from this is that no matter where you come from, when you come in our door, all victims of crime are deserving of the same justice the system can offer." Which I think was a very powerful statement, because it's true.
It is true.
If this was a domestic violence situation, which technically it would fall under that category regardless of whether there was domestic violence in their relationship prior to the murder, she killed her pseudo ex-husband, and I say pseudo ex-husband because it seemed like they were getting back together according to what Meyer said, that he believed, as far as he knew, that they did get back together. You know, Judith murdered her pseudo ex-husband because of money. And this case just reinforces that the idea that a man can experience domestic violence as well. So this was a different case. You know, we don't see a lot of cases with the domestic violence victim being a man, but it's important to show that men can suffer domestic violence just as much as women. It just is not something that is talked about as much because, you know, men are supposed to be big, strong, and
right.
infallible.
It's a different, you know, the women are quote unquote the weaker sex. So if there is going to be domestic violence, you tend to think that it's the man against the woman, not the other way around. And I don't think a lot of men want to admit that they're the victims.
Exactly, and there's no shame in that.
No. I'm not saying that
no,
there is.
I'm saying that there's no shame in it. Like it's like with depression. You know, men think that, or people think that men can't be depressed or show emotion, and that's just stupid. So that was the murder of Kenneth Nix. Down below, I'll have resources for domestic violence hotlines, like I try and put in for every domestic violence case that we present. And this was a sad one. It seems like he was a good man, especially based on what Kevin, his son, said about him. You know, at the very least, you know, he loved his children very much. And to add an extra layer of sadness to this, the day that he died was the day he became a great-grandfather, or his grandchild. I don't know if it was granddaughter or his grandson, had a baby. His great-granddaughter was born the day he was killed.
The child will never know.
Yeah, and Kevin said that he had tried to call his dad, you know, to tell him, like, you know, she was born, she's here, and he never answered. Obviously, he didn't answer. And it was just, it adds an extra layer of sadness to the story because he was only 69. That is very young.
Right. He had
many years. He would have had many years with his great-granddaughter.
Right.
It's an extra layer of sad. But I'm sure that Kevin tells his granddaughter all sorts of stories about her great-grandpa. And he'll live on that way.
Yes, he's not truly gone because he lives in their memories.
Yeah. And yeah, we hope you guys had a great Thanksgiving. And again, check out the merch store for our Black Friday sale and check out our Patreon. And next week we have an interview coming your way that was a really good one, and I hope you guys like it. So with that, we will see you in the next one.
Have a lovely rest of your week, and happy shopping for those that are shopping because of, you know, all of the upcoming holidays.
Bye, guys.
Thank you so much for listening to this chapter of the Book of the Dead. And don't forget that you can always connect with us on Instagram. You can connect with us on Twitter, and you can absolutely connect with us on Patreon. We also have a merch store as well that we have frequent discount codes coming out for, so that you guys can get merch hand-drawn by myself at a better cost.
We hope you have a lovely rest of your week. And just remember, please be kind.
And don't forget to always stay safe, stay curious, and stay vigilant. Bye, guys.
Bye.